Thank you everybody so much for this warm welcome. I hope you can hear me adequately. Can you hear me all right? Please let me know, wave your hands if you can hear me. So, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, phew. Good. That's a great relief. Wonderful. So let's get underway. I'm just going to share my screen. Good. I hope everybody can see that. First, let me start by saying a very big thank you to Piki in the centre for inviting me. And thanks to our Master and Mistress of Ceremonies for that kind introduction. And thirdly, what a huge pleasure it is to be able to be with you, even if only virtually today. So it's an absolute delight to see people I know and to take part as one of the speakers in this symposium. So those of you who know me know that I speak too much, and so I thought, what can I do to make sure that I appropriately contain my remarks to the time I've been given? And also, what's important to me as a way that academic staff and students can work together to embrace ideas about academic integrity together. So putting those two together, I thought, well, today I'd just like to address avoiding plagiarism. So I've got just a very few slides of very practical little exercises that staff and students can start to do to practice acquiring the capabilities that will help to avoid plagiarism and to appropriately acknowledge the work of others. Once you have these capabilities, they will stand you in good stead throughout your future careers, wherever you go, because you will know how appropriately to refer to others, and people will be able to see that you have these capabilities and these skills. I think this is important for lots of reasons. First of all, although there's always a temptation, my experience is that many students don't want to cheat. They don't want to gain an unfair advantage. They actually want to learn the skills, academic skills, which is why they're at Divine Word University. So, however, we know that many students can be trapped and tripped up by unintentionally plagiarizing. Now, my experience has also been that students can find it difficult to understand the concept of different voices in written text or writing for an audience. This is certainly my experience when I was teaching at Divine Word University, but also when teaching in Australia. That students sometimes forget that they're writing for the lecturer, and the lecturer knows a lot, but they also sometimes forget that there is a difference between their voice and the voice of the respected author whose work they are using. I think we know that many students are not confident in their referencing skills, and even more so, they're not confident or skilled in paraphrasing. And believe me, becoming skilled in paraphrasing takes a lot of experience. But our undergraduate students have at least 4 years with us at Divine Word University, so plenty of time to acquire those skills in English. I think you will all agree that the more reading people do in English, the easier it becomes, but the easier it is also to have words and concepts to use in paraphrasing. Anyway, I said I'd be very practical, and I will be. Students are not confident in identifying different voices, in referencing, in paraphrasing. And so let's have them do some practice. This is where I find there's often a big gap between an academic integrity policy and practice. All students know that they should avoid cheating. All students know they should avoid plagiarizing. But how do they do this? Yeah, it's not like flicking a switch. It takes practice. So it seemed to me that if I were teaching these days, I would be taking a little time from my lecture. I know your lectures are absolutely jam-packed full of content, so there's too much to teach, but I would be taking some time, yeah, maybe just once a week, and asking students to practice their academic skills, which will also help them to practice learning about some of the key concepts. So here are just a few points that I would suggest maybe you could try as academics in your class, or as students you could take on board too. So the first is the one I mentioned about identifying different voices. It's very clear to most academics when the voice in a text changes. Now, here's just a made-up example that you could pass to a group of students and say, read the text and think where there might be a change in the voice of the writer, the voice being what's expressed in words. This is where reading things aloud really helps. So I think reading this, if you have time, you could see that the first few sentences are pretty simple and pretty straightforward. Then the sentence, PNG is a post-colonial society like many Pacific countries. Well, that's quite a sophisticated concept, a bit more sophisticated and a bit longer than the other sentences. Then there is another really long sentence. Notwithstanding their present independence, the reliance of Pacific Island countries on MIRAB elements, etc., etc. So you can see that this long sentence with complex words clearly seems to have been taken from another text. There's a different voice. So the important thing here is, I think, for students to realise that if their assignment looked like this, then the lecturer would say, hello, there's a different voice here. Does this sentence beginning notwithstanding come from someone else, and therefore should it be referenced? So I think it's quite good fun to just try. There are no right or wrong answers, but reading text attentively to try to hear the different voices, I think, can be quite illuminating for students. You may or may not agree. So paraphrasing, I mentioned, is difficult, but again, I think you can ask students to work together to help them find their own voice. And so if you took 15 minutes to ask students to work in a small group or in pairs to explain some of the key ideas that you're trying to convey in their own words, just to speak them, not to write them, because speaking comes before writing, and then summarize them, and then think of why the idea is important to make an argument, then I think they're actually practicing tools and techniques that could be useful for subsequent paraphrasing. But I also think this helps to reinforce student learning of the key ideas. So we've all done the practice of reading a textbook and highlighting this and highlighting that and highlighting that. But believe me, learning happens when you ask somebody to explain something to somebody else, especially in their own words. Another good practice, this is not the world's best example, but I think it's a clear example, is that you can show students what is correct citation and what is incorrect citation. Now, this example here doesn't use APA style. It just uses the author's names and a numeric reference. But the point is that if you take a sentence that is being referenced, you can give students practice. And there are many guides and many examples here that I'm sure you can borrow from the internet or from resources like this one that I've provided. And another simple exercise to reinforce a point, I think, is to make the point that the references at the end need their pair. They need their matching in-text citation. A reference list is not a bibliography, which is a complete account. So as a simple, quite entertaining exercise, you can simply give your students a smallish piece of text and show the in-text citations, then get the students to find the pair in the references, or vice versa. These seem very simple, but they all just reinforce a point that is difficult for students to appreciate in the abstract. And one final suggestion from me, there are some really good guides. Some of them are quite lengthy, but here's one that I found recently that I think is really helpful. You don't have to ask your students or yourself to read it from cover to cover, but you could actually just work your way through the first few pages, and I think students would learn quite a lot from that. So that's my very brief presentation. Happy, of course, to take questions or comments after the other speakers have spoken, but these are just some simple exercises that staff and students can do together to help develop those academic skills of correct referencing. Thank you very much.